Hi there, and welcome to our weekly midweek ritual. Well, technically it's Thursday, but it's not Friday, so it's still the midweek. And it's good to be back again, doing the webinars that we have been doing for quite some time. So for all of you who are new here and even our, old friends, a quick little introduction about me. I am Atul and I do everything DevRel at InfraCloud. So I am busy creating POCs sometimes. I am busy writing blog posts, sometimes doing webinars like these and talks. And outside of that, I am a CNCF ambassador as well as, organizer for meetups in my city here in Hyderabad, India. And outside of that, I am a big time foodie and a travel blogger. So when I'm not doing DevRel activities, when I'm not doing tech meetups, you can find me at a restaurant eating some new dish or something of that sort. And as you might have already guessed, I am not alone in this webinar today. I have some special guests and more importantly, some good friends for these webinars. And like I said in the previous shows that as a host, I have the superpower to, show and hide people. So let me just bring upon my friends today on the stage. I have Suza and Matthew from Humanitech joining us for today's webinar. Hi, Suza. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, Atul. It's
Hi
great to be
everyone.
here.
Hey, hi. So, Susan, Matthew, there's a tradition that we have been following on these webinars. And what we do is, we don't try to introduce the guest, as in, I don't introduce you, but we let you introduce yourself. So, why don't you go ahead and tell our audience who you are, what do you do, where are you from, and, some interest outside of work, what do you do? So, Susan, why wouldn't you like to go ahead first?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Atul. I'm Suza. I'm a product manager at Humanitech and also a contributor to SCORE, the open source project we'll be talking about today. I'm currently based in Berlin, and most of my free time I spend with my little sausage dog called Otis. He has a lot of energy, so we're usually exploring the forests around Berlin. And that's been a great way to get through winter here. And it's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I'm Mathieu Benoit. Thanks for having us and having me. Really excited about this one. I'm based in Quebec City, Eastern Canada. And I'm customer success engineer for Humanitech. So I'm doing platform engineering implementation with customer, which is really exciting. And I'm also a Cloud Native ambassador, involved in communities. I'm blogging, I'm organizing a local meetup here in Quebec City, and trying to contribute as far as I can. For a living or outside work, I love spending time outdoor with outdoor activities with my family, doing some ski session with the little kiddos, hiking and stuff like this around where I live.
Wow, thank you so much, Suza, and merci beaucoup, Matthew.
My pleasure.
Fun fact, while I've been interacting around platform engineering with Matthew, I'm also trying to brush up my French skills, talking to him. So thank you again, Susan, Matthew, for joining in for this, for this webinar that we are going to have today. To everyone, who is joining in for the first time, we have been doing these webinars for quite some time now. So in case you have missed any of our previous webinars, you can scan the QR code, which will take you to our YouTube playlist where you can watch all the previous webinars. Having said that, it doesn't mean that you need to watch previous webinars before starting this. So, make sure to stay in this webinars because this one is going to be really exciting and insightful. Some housekeeping stuff before we actually deep dive into the webinar today. We would be taking in questions from all of you. So if you have any questions or queries, please drop them in the comment section below, and I would be taking up with Suza and Matthew. So before we get into platform engineering, a small anecdote that I want to share with all of you. A few of you might know about it, but still, I actually started building websites when I was in 7th grade. which, seemingly is quite early, considering when people start building websites. So I remember, learning HTML, getting some hands on PHP, and, making HTML forms, converting them to passwords, building some basic websites, having images and stuff. Now, this I'm talking about is about 2005 or 2006, which is almost 2 decades ago. Now, back then, while I was enjoying doing this, it was always a headache or a nightmare to, package all these things and put it on the hosting server that I had so that everything could go live. And over the years, I realized that it wasn't the problem that I only experienced, but developers across the globe actually had these problems. So even though they were great at building applications, writing code, but they always had issues related to, configurations, libraries, settings when it came to deploying applications to productions. And that is where the whole paradigm of DevOps came in, and the whole idea of having developers focus more on their core expertise. And over the last few years, this has transformed into platform engineering, which is the next stage of DevOps, if I can say. And based on my time I have spent in the space and interacted with everyone, if I have to put platform engineering in very simple words, I would say that it is the art and science of building a platform that actually gives a lot of self-service capabilities for your developers. So when I spoke about my story of a developer or any developer, back in time, apart from writing code, they were also responsible for setting up the infrastructure. They would probably have to set up the CI/CD pipelines or do a lot of things. And with platforms, we are trying to reduce that load that our developers have. So instead of them understanding how Terraform works or writing Terraform modules to deploy something or writing a cloud formation script to, have some cluster spin up somewhere, we will provide all these things as part of the platform. So while there is a lot of interest in platform engineering for the last few years and everyone wants to build a platform, a lot of them also have people with the right skills. But a common problem that we came across was people don't know where to start or how to start building a platform. So even when they had the team in place, they quite had, have absolutely no idea of where and how to start. So that's where, we at InfraCloud, based on our interactions with our customers and interacting with the larger platform community, you talk about tags, app delivery, or we talk about the platform working groups, we learned from them based on our experience. We came up with this platform engineering ebook. And this ebook consists of reference architectures, blueprints to help you get started, where exactly you need to start. It also gives a list of tools that you can choose for various capabilities. Score is obviously one of them that we are discussing in today's webinar. And also, there are a lot of maturity questionnaires. So, when you go through those questions, you will know where exactly you are in your platform engineering journey. And all of this is comprised in this book. It is freely available. So all you have to do is scan that little QR code there and get your hands onto this ebook. And while there are a lot of things in this ebook, one thing that I would touch upon before we get into the actual workload specification bit is the platform engineering capability map. So, like I said, when your developers are doing certain tasks or building applications, there are a lot of additional services that they might need. And this plumbing basically could be CI/CD pipelines, or maybe vaults to keep secrets, or workload specifications, for instance. So one part of the ebook is this platform engineering capability map. So what you see here are some capabilities that we have listed. And in the past webinars, we spoke about testing infrastructure, we spoke about ephemeral environments, and today we are going to speak about workload specifications. And the little time that I've spent in this domain, learning, experimenting, doing hands-on, there were a lot of terms that were thrown at me when I got into it. So if any one of you are very new to platform engineering, you will listen things like internal developer portals, or IDPs. you'll come across terms like golden paths, developer productivity, developer experience, workload specifications. So I've been learning, and I thought, when I have such wonderful friends with me, why should I learn alone and not learn in public? So I got Susa and Matthew on board to talk about workload specifications today. So like you, I am also a learner for this session today. So before we actually deep dive into workload specifications, I think it's really important to understand what exactly workloads are. So Susa, why don't you tell or enlighten our audience as to what exactly workloads are?
Cool. Yeah. I mean, the main definition that I usually go with is that a workload is a specification of how a container should be run. So you might want to run your container as a long-lived process, as a microservice, for example, or more as a short-lived process. Then that would be a cron job. That, of course, is a very high level and more abstract definition. And I generally also think that it's important to highlight that it very much depends on the, let's say, terminology your team uses. So I think in terms of naming, teams might think of workloads as applications or programs or even processes. So I think while we can all align on a definition, there might be different namings for it. So yeah, that's usually the definition I go with, but I'd also be curious, Mathieu, since you have a lot of experience working with customers in the cloud native space directly, what your experience or take on that is.
Yeah, I think you are spot on, because there is a generic definition. What's appealing with the notion of workload, right? It's generic, but actually there is a lot of definition, like you mentioned. If you talk to one company to another, one person to another, they will have their own definition of what's a workload. Is it a war, a jar? Is it the application itself? Is it a container? Maybe. Is it just the app bundle to do serverless, maybe at some point? Is it now a WASM module, maybe? So there is this kind of packaging notion around the application. So I think that's where you could define workload, but again, with different definition. But what we could see as well is industry standard, right? Around that. So I just mentioned, I don't know, container and WASM module. They are kind of some standard to help you define what could be a workload. But again, it depends on your own context.
Wow. So I think the answer to take from here is it depends. So it can range anything from a very simple cron job to a very complex container. So while these are workloads, when developers in today's age work on systems, there usually are different environments. You don't exactly go and deploy it to a production. You have, a lot of stages even before it reaches there. And a lot of times there are chances that these targets are different. So that is where you need to define a specification for your workload so that, it becomes, targeted to a particular environment. So Matthew, why don't you tell us what exactly is a workload specification and what is the benefit that it actually gets on the table?
Yeah, exactly. And I read your white paper you just introduced earlier, and that's a really good white paper to show the overview of the different building blocks, right? Making a successful platform engineering practice, as well as a reference architecture, right? And this workload specification is actually a good relationship and the transition about it depends how you want to define workload, right? So why not sitting down and making sure we are defining what could be the specifications, the contract between what we call the developers with their app versus maybe someone in the ops team who would like to deploy this workload, this application, right? So that's where this workload specification is very important to have a contract to accelerate collaboration and deployment of based on such contract. So there is this notion of abstraction and standardization, and I know we will talk a lot about that. So that's where the specification sits. And I'm sure, Suza, you have more to add on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot of benefits to list. One thing that comes up often in the context of workload specifications is, I think, the developer experience that presents a big focus for teams. And I think that's also one of the main things that workload specs try to achieve by essentially reducing cognitive load for developers. Workload specifications are simple by design, so they only expose kind of relevant workload level entities that the developer is familiar with. And I think that really helps to reduce cognitive load because Atul, as you said in your introductory talk, like just writing code, it's not as easy as that often. And I think by having a workload spec, we're getting to a place where we scope the developer's responsibility in a more reasonable way and thereby make their lives a lot easier. So I think that's, another big benefit of something you can achieve with a workload spec, and from my experience. Yeah.
Interesting. So a lot of good adjectives that are coming in here. Matthew spoke about standardization. He spoke about abstraction, and Susan added about the cognitive load and defining the scope of actual work that is required. So now we know what a workload is, and we probably have some understanding of workload specification. Basically creating a spec file or a contract, as Matthew defines, for the workload and how to interact it with the teams upstream. Now, I'm sure that writing specs or writing workload spec for different targets manually is obviously a very, very bad idea, because I'm sure there are tools available there to automate things. So while I would not myself talk a lot about it, I would want both of you to let us know maybe some factors around how to choose a certain tool, a workload specification tool that probably offloads this entire thing from the head of my developer.
Cool. Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I don't want to start with it depends again, but it definitely does depend on your use case. But I mean, there are some, I guess, like more or less objective criteria that teams can orient towards. So one thing you mentioned already, Atul, is that you wouldn't want to write a spec for every single platform you run on. So I think a good characteristic to have in a workload spec is that it's platform agnostic. So it's not bound to a specific runtime or container orchestration tool, but is rather flexible and thereby works across platforms and across environments. And another thing that Mathieu mentioned before is that ideally the spec enforces standardization while also not like limiting you. So there should be a way to extend or customize if you needed to, because in a way the spec is always like a more or less like biased way of abstracting things. And I think for each team, there should be the opportunity to like cross through that and actually like extend it if needed. And apart from that, of course, it's always nice if the spec can be implemented in a lightweight way. So it doesn't replace existing tooling or replace existing workflows that already work well, but kind of like nicely integrates into your kind of work stream, and thereby also allows easy onboarding and things like that. However, I guess it's also important to mention that like these are characteristics that are specific to a tool or a workload spec, but it's also important to look beyond that, because at the end of the day, your users or your end users are the developers. So I think it's important that this shouldn't be like a management decision where it's like, oh, we have this checklist that needs to be completed, then we have a good spec in place. But this should also be like driven bottom up and kind of spark excitement from the developers themselves.
Matthew, anything would you like to add to this? Yeah, actually, choosing the right tool, and that's a good question, because often what we do, and I have a developer background, right? I was software engineer, and I, like you mentioned, for you, Atul, I moved to more ops and DevOps and platform engineering, right? So I have two backgrounds, if I could say, around that. And what I have seen, and I was part of that, is always making decision based on the tool, right? Because what we mentioned is about the workload. I have any app, maybe I will package that as a container, right? But what we haven't discussed about the workload specification advantage is how to deploy it, right? So if we take the example with Kubernetes, am I doing Helm? Am I doing customize? Am I doing straight and plain Kubernetes manifest? Actually, at the end of the day, it's a technical detail implementation. And if I'm a pro for Helm, I don't want to do customize, right? And I know it's not either or, but sometimes I'm seeing people like making their point about the choice of tools and technology. But we should elevate a bit the debate here, because it's what Susa and you mentioned. It's about dev experience. So before choosing the right tool, you also need to make sure you are answering a need, you are fixing the issue. Do you have some lead time very long to go to production? Do you have some manual steps in your automation pipeline? Do you have like friction from your developer, your customer, right? And what are the friction? Is it the learning curve to learn Helm or customize? Is it the maintenance of shifting left to the developer on security? Should they know Kubernetes? So that's here a key point, which is where the level of abstraction you want now in place in order to fix and resolve concrete issue you have in your pipeline, right? And that's the right level of discussion and the right level of tool you could select after that. Yeah, that would be my take on that. Not just focused on the tool, but also what you're trying to resolve, and then seeing the option you have here.
I think that's a really great point. Yeah, don't start with the tool, but start with your users, right? That's often where the notion of treat your platform as a product comes from, to actually do that user research initially to really understand like what are the underlying pain points you're trying to fix before jumping to solutions. I would totally agree with that. Yeah.
Interesting. I think you both pointed out on really critical core aspects of what platform engineering brings to the table. We touched upon the platform as a product, what Susa just mentioned, and that is a complete different area where, a lot of teams, a lot of people are working. In fact, a plug from the working group of platform engineering at TAG, there's already a discussion, another paper that is being worked upon around platform as a product. And also you pointed out about, the entire spectrum of developer experience, building something which your developers need, instead of, you deciding something that, hey, I like it, this needs to be a part of my platform. I think, this is something which even Matthew and Abby mentioned to me in my presentation that I gave, last week, that it's very important to focus on the needs of your developers and not on what you actually want to add to the platform. Great. So I think, we have had some real good discussions around workloads. We started by talking about workloads a little bit, diving into, not diving, maybe scratching the surface of workload specification, and then touching upon the tools as well. So now I think, it's a very good junction to introduce Core and understand from Susa and Matthew on how Core actually helps with workload specification and the entire magic it creates. I got a glimpse of it when I was in KubeCon last year, and I would let them show the magic of Score now on. So, Susan, Matthew, the stage is all yours.
Cool. Yeah, let's do it. So yeah, just to give a quick overview, if you could go to the slide back, we can just go over the initial dates to make sure everyone's aligned. So Score was launched in November 2022, so it's still quite young. This past year, we were very much focused on spreading the word, getting feedback, getting first usage experience. And now that we have a good understanding of what we need to improve and what works and where we generally want to develop the tool, we decided to submit it to the CNCF sandbox early this year, which is a really exciting milestone for us. And exactly, if there's no further questions on that, I'm happy to then jump to the philosophies and concepts that you were just showing. Cool. So these are essentially just a few pain points that somewhat build the foundation for Score. The first thing that we noticed is that cloud native developers experience increased cognitive load due to tech and tools that require specialized knowledge. So this is essentially what we just talked about. Development can often be very complicated, and developers are no longer in a place where they're just writing code. They're often exposed to infrastructure orchestration tooling, be it Kubernetes or Helm, and that then leads to less focused coding time. So Atul, essentially, like very much the experience that you had. And that kind of directly relates to the next point. Different config rules and values between environments increase the risk of configuration inconsistencies. So yeah, that's pretty much a result from the first point. In a simplified way, if you look at it, the closer you move to production, the more complicated it gets. So locally, you will work with a lightweight tool such as Docker Compose, for example, but then you might deploy to a remote environment that then runs on, let's say, Kubernetes. And this gap between platforms and environments increases the risk of configuration inconsistency. So in simple terms, this is just a translation issue, right? How do you make sure that your workload is defined consistently, even if the platform, in this example, Compose to Kubernetes changes? And these were the two main pain points that we discovered and wanted to tackle with SCORE. And what we advocate for instead, of course, is then that devs should focus on writing code rather than dealing with infrastructure concerns. And I think it's on that point, it's important to point out that this is a spectrum, though, right? There are some developers that feel very comfortable with actually diving into infrastructure concerns, and they should definitely continue to do that. SCORE just has the intention to kind of provide this initial abstraction layer as the default, but you can, of course, dig deeper if you want or need to. And the second point is that the workload configuration should be consistent independently of the platform or environment it runs on. So that's essentially the second point that I mentioned before. And yeah, we can move on to the next slide just to see how this looks in practice. So this is a bit of a context switch now, and we'll loop back to the pain points later. I thought it would just be helpful to actually understand what we're talking about when we say SCORE. So in a nutshell, SCORE is a developer-centric, platform-agnostic, and declarative workload specification. So in simple terms, the SCORE specification captures your workload's runtime requirements. You have one file per workload, and it's saved alongside the workload's code and source control. And looking at these individual characteristics here, developer-centric essentially means that it's tightly scoped. So it describes common workload level items and shields from the complexity of container.
Oh, we just lost Suza.
Yeah. Yep, I guess that.
Yeah. So, and I could continue. Yeah. So on this, what's interesting here on this SCORE spec and actual example, that's what I will demonstrate in my demo. So the goal here again is developer-centric, being agnostic to the environment and the platform where it will be actually deployed, right? And that's all about that. So I think we could move on the next slide. Here, what we want to show you is there is a spec. And actually, there is already something I will show you during the demo, which is the SCORE implementation, right? There is a spec and the implementation. Two popular and very used implementation we have is how I could, from this spec, actually transform that, let's say, in Compose, Docker Compose, right? How I could deploy locally on my Docker daemon and Docker Compose setup, how I could deploy actually this specification, this workload. That's one use case. The other one is, oh, I may want to deploy that in Kubernetes, right? Because we are taking an entry as an input as a container. So another implementation we have is SCORE Helm. And actually, the goal is to grow this ecosystem of implementation. We have some other implementation out there with Humanitech, obviously, but also other collaboration going on. And that's where you could see that for a generic approach and generic specification, we could actually deploy somewhere, and this somewhere is abstracted from the developer perspective. So that's all about that. So what I could propose, Atul, if that's okay with you, I could show now the part of the demo, if that's okay. And you are on mute, Atul.
Absolutely. And by the way, Susa is back. And in case any of the viewer is thinking I had to do something of her dropping off, no, I didn't do anything.
No, sorry, that
I
was
want
a
to be
technical hiccup on my end. Matthew, thanks for jumping
Yeah,
in.
no problem at all. No
Yeah.
problem at all.
So yes, Matthew, I think this you have the control for the next one. Yeah.
Cool, wonderful. So just to clarify and to show you where it fits and it sits, the workload specification we are talking about. What we are all talking about is how, on a developer standpoint, on the left, I could be abstracted to any technical detail implementation about where my workload, my application will be deployed. On the other end, there is another need. I want, as a platform engineer, it could be security, SRE, it could be ops. I want to standardize. I want to make sure that I could inject security context. I could inject cost center label. I could have control on the common stuff I need to deal with without impacting and asking my developer to do. So that's where the score spec is, on the very left-hand side, to have this contract and this this abstraction, right? And I will show you quickly the inner loop you could do as well on that. But the goal is to show you something very important. Often people are claiming or thinking that Kubernetes is a platform for your platform. Actually, it's a platform for your platform, right? And that's where the confusion and the issue at scale in your company you may have, because as a developer, if you are just interacting with Kubernetes and you don't have a layer on top of that, you should learn Kubernetes the hard way, not setting up the cluster, but all what it takes on top of that. The Kubernetes manifest, the security aspect, the networking aspect, etc., right? So the goal is to abstract that. And there is this notion of, in the middle, a layer orchestrating, taking this specification and actually deploy somewhere. It could be via Argo CD on a GitOps way, but it could be your CI and CD pipeline, Jenkins, GitLab pipeline, GitHub Action, etc. So you have something taking the spec and transforming that and actually generating the Kubernetes manifest at the end of the day. But what you want also is injecting the secrets and the infrastructure pieces, dependencies, right? But again, abstracted from the developer perspective. So what I want to show you here is actually here, and I hope it's big enough for everyone. What I want to show you is I have a very simple application, Node.js application, talking to a PostgreSQL database, and just displaying and reaching the database to see if it's working, displaying a message. Very simple, but the goal is to say, you have a Docker file. What you will have now is the score file, which is sitting down close to your application because you are the developer. You know how you want to expose on which part your application, right? And here I have the variable, environment variable that you may know. So, and you are under control with that. You know how you want to inject the connection string. Is it one environment variable? Is it multiple in your code? You know that. And here we could see that there is a generic placeholder. I don't know the password. I don't know the username. I don't know where it is. Is it on AWS? Is it in cluster? I don't know. And at this stage, I don't want to know. I'm designing what I need, I require, my application requires. And I could also request, for example, to expose or not my application. And here I want to ask for a Postgres database. So here it's all about the dependencies, the resources, and the spec of my container here, how I expose it. So I have this makefile here just to accelerate the pieces of the demo. Let me go through you remember this inner loop in my schema? Actually here, what you could do, taking this score file, is actually using score compose. You remember this implementation? That's where you take the score file and you transform that in a compose file, right? And you could inject some parameter. What you could do right after, transforming this score file, and I could show you it's already done to accelerate the demo again. So score file is now translated in a compose file. And you could see that what I define in score file is now here, for example, right? So what I could do after that is Docker compose up, right? And I'm using compose here based on the score file. I could test my application, but what I want to show you is another scenario. Now, how I could move in the pipeline, in the CI/CD pipeline, because at the end of the day, that's maybe Kubernetes, right? And here you have score Helm implementation. Same principle. You take as an input the score file, and you transform this score file in a values.yaml file. So here, I just did that to accelerate the demo again, but look at that, from the same score file, I could have now my values of my Helm values, right? Injecting the value. Here, what you could do is having, and we provide a default Helm chart, is here, publicly available as a workload, right? You could inject this value here and just say Helm upgrade, right? So here you have an abstraction about how the values will be mapped in your Helm chart, maybe, and it's highly encouraged to be maintained and authored by the platform and the platform engineer, actually, right? So here I could just deploy that on my Kubernetes. It could be locally. If I want, as a developer, to have this inner loop, that's something possible. But here, there is already the avenue to abstract that as well for your developer, and just having this technical detail implementation in your CI/CD pipeline, right? Or in your platform, right? So that's what we wanted to clarify with you on that aspect here, making sure you see the advantage of this abstraction / standardization and how it works actually. We have some very exciting momentum currently, like Susan mentioned. We have a submission to the CNCF sandbox out there, and we have a good discussion with the community. We are taking questions, we are clarifying what it does, and where we want to have the community part of that, because we think that on a maturity scale and level of platform engineering, there is something very, very interesting here. So feel free to ask any question, contact us on that. On the QR code here, you could see a blog article referring to this CNCF sandbox entry for score. What we are bringing is bonifying, if I could say, the landscape today. If we mentioned about the platform engineering white paper from CNCF, the workload spec is a good candidate here. And again, the CNCF working group, platform working group, worked on an interesting white paper as well about the maturity of a platform and platform engineering. And what we are seeing based on the communities and customer is workload specification is abstracting and standardizing, and it's very on this scale motion and optimizing, right? So it depends on your maturity. You may not be at this level of consideration, but that's where the interface and the adoption on a developer standpoint is very, very appealing. Yeah, that's pretty much it on our end. Over to you, Atul.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew, for that real insightful demo. I do find the entire concept of score very, magical, if I can say. I just have to pass one particular file, give it one configuration, and then it just, gets me a YAML, it gets me a Docker Compose, and it gets me, I think, anything anything else that I need to require as well as part of my particular use case. So if you have any questions, you still have got some time to ask, so you can put them in the comments below. To quickly, I think, sum things up, we did touch upon starting by workloads itself, what essentially workloads are. So, and I think this is something which I'm not going to forget for a long time. Like Susa defined, it can be as simple as a cron job, or it could be as complex as a container. I think that's one of the best descriptions of a workload, it can have. And then the whole idea of workload specification and, the required abstraction and standardization that a workload spec brings in. And then obviously, looking into score and, understanding more about the workload specification tool in such, the benefits such tools bring into the entire landscape of platform engineering. So I think, we did have a very good discussion, and we did quite a view, scratching the surface and deep diving into workloads as well. So both Matthew and Susa are available online. You can chat with them or about the whole sandbox thing. You can catch hold of them on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. And I'm sure, they would be more than happy to help you out, understand more about workload spec, and also, about the entire, score setup as well. And while I'm trying to wrap up, Manav has one question. So I'm just flashing it up on the screen. So Manav is actually asking whether can I use a custom workload specification with Score? If yes, how easy or how difficult or how it actually works. So I think he's trying to ask, apart from Docker Compose and Kubernetes, if there is some other target that I have, how does Score actually handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I could start, and feel free, Susa, to jump on this after. We got this question, so it's a great question. Actually, how I could improve or extend the current specification. That's one of them, one part of the question. And the second one is how I could extend for my own implementation, like you just mentioned, Atul. And the first answer is you could contribute actually to this spec. And making it growing on a generic aspect, right? So that's the first answer of that. Please contribute if you see improvement. And if we see a fit on a generic aspect, it will be something we could collaborate and discuss on the spec itself. Now, what we see is implementation, right? So let's say Compose as on top of what the generic spec is proposing. That's the implementation and extension that you could add some contribution here. Same for Helm. Actually, Humanitech is doing that as well. So that's the second part of the answer, which is each own implementation will have its extension as well.
Yeah, I think you summarized that. Sorry, yeah, Mathieu, you summarized that perfectly. The spec, of course, wants to present a standard, but it can be extended if needed. And same for the implementation. So looking at the Score Compose implementation we have in place, that's more of a reference implementation that can be used as a guiding example for you to build your own implementations of the spec. So that is not set in stone at all and can be extended according to your use case. And of course, because Score is platform agnostic, you can translate it to essentially any container orchestration tooling out there. It has the potential to do that and can be extended in that way.
Absolutely. I think, Manav, I hope you got your answer to that query. Like Susa, Matthew, both of them said, Score being a platform agnostic, tool. What you can do is, you can reach out to the team, check out their GitHub repo, to see if you can make any contributions. And I'm sure, if you have any interesting spec that needs to be done, Susa and team can definitely get in touch with you, collaborate, and see, what all of you can build for Score in the future. So I think with that, we are at the hour, dot, and we come to the end of today's webinar. A big thank you to Susan and Matthew for sharing your precious time with all of us. We had a great time. I hope you both had a good time too.
Thanks so much for having us. Yeah, it was great chatting about SCORE. And as you said, if anyone's interested in just having a chat or collaborating, we have a Slack channel, but otherwise you'll also find us in the CNCF Slack, of course.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us.
Absolutely. So last couple of things, again, if you love this webinar, do follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to know more about the upcoming webinars. And you can get the ebook downloaded. Again, you can scan the QR code here. And you will see me again, hopefully in a few weeks' time with another brand new episode of the webinar. And in case you want to rewatch this, this will be uploaded on our YouTube channel in some time, so you can watch that as well. So thank you once again to everyone for joining in, our speakers and friends, Matthew and Souza. And, we are looking forward to seeing you again in our next webinar. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you guys.